Hello, my little love. Did you have a good day today? I hope something made you smile. Now take a slow breath, relax your shoulders, and let your mind get soft and quiet. It's time for a gentle bedtime story. Once upon a time, in the oldest days of the world, when the mountains were still settling into their shapes, and the rivers were still finding which way they liked to run, there lived a very old couple in a very small house at the edge of a forest. The man's name was Philemon and the woman's name was Baucis, and they had been together for so long that they had grown to resemble each other, in the way that people who love each other deeply sometimes do, finishing each other's thoughts before they were spoken. Moving around their small house with the comfortable ease of two people who have learned to share a space so well that the sharing has become invisible, as natural as breathing. Their house was simple. The walls were made of clay and woven reeds, and the roof was thatched with the long grasses that grew at the edge of the pond nearby, and in summer, when the light fell through the window, it caught the dust motes floating in the warm air and turned them to tiny golden sparks. There was a hearth where a fire burned from morning to night in the cold months, and a table worn smooth by years of elbows and bowls and the business of daily meals, and two wooden chairs that had been repaired so many times with different wood that they had become, over the years, a kind of record of all the repairs, a patchwork of different grains and colors that was its own kind of beautiful. Outside the house was a small garden. Philemon tended it with great love and moderate skill, which is the best combination for a garden. Because love keeps you going through the failures and moderate skill means there are enough successes to give the love something to work with. He grew cabbages and onions and a fig tree that leaned against the south wall of the house and produced, every summer, more figs than the two of them could possibly eat, so that they spent several pleasant weeks each year pressing figs into neighbors' hands and leaving small baskets of them on doorsteps. Baucis kept the house and the fire and the kitchen, though these are small words for what she actually did, which was to transform the humble and the plain into the warm and the wonderful. She could make a soup from very little that tasted of abundance. She could make a room feel welcoming with nothing more than a fire and the positioning of a chair. She understood, without having been taught it, that the most important ingredient in any home is attention. The quality of noticing what is needed and providing it quietly, before it is asked for. They did not have very much, Philemon and Baucis, but they had what they needed, and they had each other, and they had, most importantly, the particular and very deep contentment of people who have understood what truly matters and arranged their lives accordingly. They were happy in the way that is most worth being happy, not the loud and urgent happiness of novelty and excitement, but the quiet and enduring happiness of a life that fits you truly, like a coat made to measure, comfortable in every seam. One evening in the late autumn, when the air had turned cold and the leaves had come down from the trees and lay in soft drifts along the paths and the sky at dusk, was that deep and luminous shade of blue that autumn evenings have, as if the sky is holding a little of the summer warmth inside itself. Even as the cold arrives, there was a knock at the door of the small house. Philemon and Baucis were not expecting anyone. Their neighbors did not often visit in the evening. They looked at each other across the table where they had been sitting with their cups of warm herb tea, and Philemon rose and went to the door and opened it. On the doorstep were two travelers. They were road-worn in the way of people who have walked a long way, their cloaks dusty and their sandals muddy from the autumn roads. One was tall and broad, with a bearing that was somehow large. Even though he was standing quietly, the way some people take up more space than their physical size would suggest simply by the quality of their presence. The other was younger seeming and quicker, with bright eyes that moved with the alert and interested quality of someone who finds everything worth paying attention to. They said they had been walking since morning and were very tired and very hungry, and wondered if the house might have a little room for 2 travelers for the night. Philemon did not hesitate. He opened the door wider and stood back and said, "Come in, come in. You are welcome. Please come and warm yourselves." He did not know these strangers. He did not know where they had come from or where they were going. He knew only that they were tired and cold and had come to his door, and that his door was the kind of door that opened. Baucis was already moving before the words were finished. She had heard the knock and the voices and was at the fire, adding more wood, adjusting the pot, her hands busy with the quick and purposeful movements of someone who has been welcoming guests for decades and knows exactly what to do. She pulled the 2 wooden chairs closer to the fire. She brought a basin of warm water for the travelers to wash their hands and feet after the long road. She shook out the extra blanket from the chest by the wall. The travelers came in and sat by the fire, and the warmth wrapped around them, and they let out long, slow breaths of relief, the particular relief of cold people coming into warmth, which is one of the most complete and animal comforts there is. Now, here is what Philemon and Baucis did not know. The 2 travelers at their fire were not ordinary road-worn wanderers. The tall one was Zeus, who was the greatest of all the gods, the keeper of the sky and the rain and the wide turning of the world, and the younger seeming quick-eyed one was Hermes, his son, the messenger who moved between all the worlds with the ease and speed of thought. They had come down from their mountain in disguise, as the gods sometimes did in those old days, to walk among the people and see how things truly were, without ceremony, without the particular behavior that people put on when they know they are being watched by someone important. They had been walking all day through the valley, and they had knocked at many doors before this one. Not because they needed food or rest in the way ordinary travelers do, because gods do not truly need these things, but because they were learning. They were finding out what the people of this valley were like in the moment that mattered, the unrehearsed moment. The moment when a stranger knocks and you must decide, quickly and without thinking, what kind of person you are. And door after door had been closed to them. Not cruelly, not with unkindness, but with the ordinary self-regarding caution of people who feel they have not quite enough to share, and who do not want the trouble of strangers in the evening. It had been, in its way, a sad afternoon for Zeus, not because he was surprised exactly, because he understood the many reasons why people keep their doors closed, but because he hoped for better and found it harder to find than he wished. And then this door had opened. He sat by Philemon and Baucis's fire and looked around the small room at the clay walls and the worn table, and the 2 patched chairs and the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the small good order of a house that has been tended with love, and he felt something settle in him that had been unsettled all afternoon. He felt the warmth of the fire and the warmth of the welcome. And they were the same warmth, he noticed, the fire and the welcome, both of them without reservation, both of them complete. Baucis was cooking. She had put together what she had, which was not a great deal. some cabbages and a piece of dried ham and a handful of dried herbs and some grain for porridge, and she was making from these things a meal. She moved between the fire and the table and the small shelf where her jars of dried things stood in their row. And she hummed as she worked, quietly, without noticing she was doing it, the way people hum when they are doing something they are comfortable with and their mind is pleasantly occupied. Philemon set the table. He put out the 2 good clay cups they kept for guests and the round loaf of bread that Baucis had baked that morning, and a small crock of olives from their tree and what was left of the autumn's honey in its jar. He moved around the table with the easy purposefulness of someone who knows where everything is and is glad to be using it. The tall traveler watched all of this with his large and quiet eyes, and the quick-eyed younger one watched too. And between them passed a look that carried a great deal without any words. They ate together, the 4 of them at the small worn table. And the meal was simple and it was good in the way that simple meals prepared with care always are. The goodness coming not from the ingredients alone, but from the intention behind them, from the hands that chose them and combined them with attention and put them on the table for someone else with genuine gladness at having something to give. Philemon poured the wine, a humble wine from their own small vineyard. And then something happened that made him look twice at the jug and then look at it again. He had poured 2 cups and then 2 more and the jug still felt full. He poured again and it was still full. He set it down and picked it up and looked at it with the expression of someone who is certain of what they are seeing, and equally certain that what they are seeing is not quite possible. He looked at Baucis. She had noticed too. She was very still in her chair, her cup in her hands, looking at the 2 guests across the table with an expression of dawning understanding that moved across her face slowly and completely, like sunrise. They knew, in that moment, who their guests were. And what did they do with this knowledge? They did not become afraid. They did not become grand or ceremonious or self-conscious. They felt, both of them, a deep and natural awe. The awe of standing in the presence of something much larger than yourself. But awe is not fear. And it did not change what they were or what they had been doing. They had been welcoming 2 tired travelers, and they continued to welcome 2 tired travelers, even knowing now what those travelers truly were. If anything, knowing made them more themselves rather than less, more steady in their hospitality, rather than less, because they had nothing to hide and nothing to perform and nothing that needed to be different from what it already was. Baucis looked at the jug and at their guests and then she rose and went to the small enclosure behind the house, where they kept their 1 goose, who was old and fat and had been their companion for years, and she began to move in such a way that Philemon knew what she intended. She was going to offer the goose, their only goose, their old companion, the one creature in their small farmstead that they truly could not spare. He followed her and caught her hand, not to stop her. He understood the impulse completely. He would have done the same, but to do it with her, to make the offering together if it was to be made. But the tall traveler was there in the doorway of the house, his voice kind and warm and certain. Keep your goose. She has been your friend long enough to earn her rest. What you have already given is more than enough. And the voice was so gentle and so sure that Philemon and Baucis both felt something release in them. Some last small knot of anxiety about whether they had done enough, whether their small house and their simple meal and their humble wine had been adequate to the occasion. They felt, from that voice and those words, that they had. that what they had was enough because they had given it without holding anything back. And that the giving without holding back was the whole of it, the entirety of what was asked. They went back inside and sat by the fire as the night deepened around the house, and the four of them talked. It was not a formal conversation and it was not an extraordinary one. Except in the way that all honest conversation between people who are genuinely present with each other is extraordinary, which is to say completely. Zeus asked them about their lives and they answered truly, without embellishment and without false modesty, telling him about the garden and the fig tree and the years they had spent in this place and what they had learned from the living of them. And Zeus listened. He was very good at listening, when he chose to be, because he was old enough to know that the most interesting things are usually found in exactly the places that appear most ordinary. And these two old people in their small warm house were, he was discovering, among the most interesting people he had met in a very long time. Not because they had done remarkable things, they had not, by the measure of grand deeds and heroic feats, but because they had done ordinary things with such complete and wholehearted care that the ordinary things had become remarkable. The way a simple melody played with perfect feeling is more beautiful than a complicated one played without it. When the night was deep and the fire had burned down to a warm and steady glow, Zeus looked at Philemon and Baucis across the small table and said, "You have been very kind to us tonight. I would like to give you something in return." The two old people looked at him with their gentle and open faces. They did not say, as some might have said, that no gift was necessary, that the pleasure had been theirs alone. They understood that a gift given with genuine feeling deserves to be received with genuine openness. That refusing a gift is sometimes its own kind of taking away, a removal of the giver's joy. So they said, "We would be glad to receive whatever you wish to give." Zeus was quiet for a moment. He looked around the small room and then back at them. He said, "What would you like? Tell me what you truly wish for." Philemon and Baucis looked at each other. In their long life together they had become very good at the look that means "I am thinking the same thing you are thinking." And they gave each other that look now. Then Philemon spoke for both of them, as he sometimes did, the words coming out simply and without any performance, from the same place that had opened the door without hesitation. He said, "We have had a good life here together. We would like to go on having it for as long as we can. And when the time comes that we must leave it, we would like to leave it together, so that neither of us has to be here without the other." Zeus looked at them for a long time. There was something in his expression that was not quite any single feeling but a mixture of several large and quiet ones. Something like admiration and something like tenderness and something like the particular feeling that comes when you encounter something so simple and so true that it reminds you of everything important. He said, "It will be so." And then he said something more. He said, "In this place, your house and your hearth and your garden, will be a place of welcome for as long as the world stands. The warmth you have kept here will not go out." Philemon and Baucis slept that night in their own bed with the fire low and the stars coming in through the window in their long, slow light, and they slept the deep sleep of people who have had a good day and know it. In the morning, their guests were gone, the way travelers always go in the early morning before the house is awake. But the table had been cleared and the fire had been freshly banked, and on the worn wood of the table sat the wine jug, full. The years that followed were not so different from the years before. Philemon tended his garden and his fig tree. Baucis made her soups and her bread and hummed in her kitchen. The fig tree leaned against the south wall and produced its impossible abundance every summer. The fire burned. The door opened to whoever knocked. And they grew old together, as they had always grown old, at the same pace, with the same grace. Two people so long entwined that the boundary between them had become something soft and permeable, not a loss of self, but an expansion of it, each one larger for the other's presence than they would have been alone. And one morning in the spring, when the garden was just beginning and the air smelled of rain and warm earth and the first green of new things coming up through the soil, they were standing together in the garden, Philemon's hand in Baucis's hand, looking at something the other had just pointed out. Some small and wonderful thing in the garden that deserved to be noticed, and a warmth moved over them both like a gentle wind. And they felt the particular piece of something completing itself exactly as it should. And where they had stood, two trees grew. They grew up slowly and together, their roots going down into the same earth, their branches spreading upward and outward and intertwining at the top in the way of trees that have grown beside each other for a long time and have learned to share the light. Each one finding its own path toward the sun without taking from the other, both of them together making a canopy that was wider and more generous than either would have made alone. One was a linden, with broad heart-shaped leaves that trembled in the lightest wind and made a sound like very quiet and very gentle rain, and in summer, it filled the air for a long way around with a sweetness that was warm and soft and full of bees. And the other was an oak, deep-rooted and wide-crowned, its bark the color of old stone, its leaves the deep true green of something sure of itself, its acorns falling in autumn with small round satisfying sounds onto the soft ground below. The two trees grew at the edge of what had been the garden, and they grew as trees grow, slowly and with great patience and great purpose, putting down roots that went deeper with every year and spreading branches that went wider, and travelers who came that way and rested in their shade felt something in that shade that was different from ordinary shade. A quality of welcome in it, a warmth even in the cool of it, as if the shade itself was glad to have someone to shelter. And they say, those who know the story, that if you sit very quietly between the two trees on a warm afternoon when the air is still and the bees are in the linden blossoms and the oak leaves are barely moving, you can sometimes hear something that is not quite the wind and not quite the leaves and not quite anything you can name. But that feels like the sound of two people who have known each other for a very long time, talking quietly about the small and beautiful things they have noticed in the world, pointing them out to each other, glad to be together, glad to have something to share. That is the sound of a promise being kept. Because some promises, the ones made with the whole heart and received with the whole heart, do not end. They change shape, they find new forms. They move from one kind of being into another, the way water moves from river to cloud to rain to river again. Always the same water, always continuing, always finding its way back. The warmth in that small clay house with its worn table and its patched chairs and its open door did not go out. It grew into the earth and into the sky and into the air of that place. And it is still there if you know how to find it, in the quality of shade under two old trees, in the way the light falls on an autumn evening over a garden where someone has been paying careful and loving attention to what grows. And every door that opens to a tired stranger on a cold evening carries a little of that same warmth. Every table set for someone unexpected. Every cup of warm something offered without hesitation. Every small and genuine act of welcome given not from abundance but from the decision to give what you have. That is the promise. That is the kindness. That is the thing that is too important to go out. And it has not. And it will not. You did well today, my little love. Now let your eyes grow heavy. And let the night wrap around you like a soft blanket. Sleep well, sweet dreams, and rest deeply.